Hello, guys. Welcome to my podcast. My name is Praymore for those who are joining me for the first time. And if you're returning, welcome back. So, today we're going to be discussing the inner voice, toxic self talk versus healthy introspection. And we're also going to discuss validation and empathy, if those two are enough when someone comes to vent to you. And all this essentially revolves around the emotional pain that we experience. And this week I listened to something interesting about pain, emotional pain. Someone was asking, why does emotional pain causes physical pain? Why do people use the same kind of the same language when describing their emotional pain as they would with physical pain? And there's a doctor called Kross who explained this in a way that I found really um, enlightening. He said that our social relations are central to our ability to thrive. So when there's a potential threat, when there's potential danger to those social relations, our body uses the pain system to alert us of danger. In the same way that physical pain would alert you that your body is in danger, the same thing happens with your emotions. So I thought that was quite outstanding. So he also went further to discuss what the inner voice is. So I just want to note that today's topic was inspired by a book that is written by Dr. Kross, which is called Chatter. So it basically speaks about the inner voice, what it is, how to harness the power to control it, and things along those lines. It's very interesting. And most of the points that I'm going to be mentioning today come from the interviews that he had about his book. So if you have any chance, please get your hands on that book. So he described the inner voice as silent verbal processing. And he said that it's a very private yet common experience. It's common to people, yet it's very private. And this can easily be confused with hearing voices. And the distinction between these two is when you hear the inner voice, you know that the source of that voice is you. You are the source of that voice. Whereas hearing voices is usually attributed to an external source. So even though with an inner voice, you can simulate another person's voice, but you know you're the source of that voice. So for instance, I can be reading a book and imagine the voice of the author. So the voice doesn't necessarily sound like mine in my head, but I know that I'm the one who's simulating that person's voice. Or you could be imagining your parent giving you an instruction. You could be simulating your mother's voice, but you know that the source is you. And many people also attribute hearing voices to mental illness, which is very far-fetched, honestly, because there's so many people with properly functioning brains with no intellectual disabilities who do report that they hear voices. For instance, some people will report that they heard the voice of God. Other people, it's very different, and it's not a diagnosis for mental illness when someone says that they're hearing voices. There's so many more criteria, and there's so many aspects to it. So yeah, I just wanted to note that. So our inner voice is central to how we learn how to control ourselves. So you might have noticed with younger children, they even go as far as verbalizing that internal conversation that is going on. So if their parent told them, do not pick your nose, do not go outside after this time, they often repeat it to themselves. No, I'm not supposed to do this. No, I'm not supposed to do this. But this is the same thing that happens with us when we get older, except that conversation usually takes place internally, which is what the inner voice is all about. So, why does our internal conversation go well at times and not so well at others? So, our inner voice is malleable. It can be used in both healthy and toxic ways because it's a tool. And the same way that you can use any tool for good and for bad, that's the same thing that you can do with your internal voice. And many people use it to dwell on their problems. Many people use it to worry. Many people use it to project negative things. But in the same way, you can use your internal voice for good. So the reason why it's usually associated with toxic toxic thoughts and toxic and unhealthy behavior is because most of the times when it gets activated, it's when we're facing problems. So it gets activated as soon as you're going through something, because this is the way that you gain awareness of whatever it is that you're going through. So it's a tool you can use to gain awareness of your problems, which is important. We've mentioned this in I've mentioned this in the previous recording that I did. The importance of awareness, the importance of acknowledging the problem that you have, because that's the first step to solving your problem. Yet at the same time, you can also use it to dwell on your problems. And this can lead to rumination or worry. So when you're ruminating, you are thinking about the past, things that happened before, you don't feel so good about it. Whereas with worry, you start projecting negative things about the future. So, it works both ways. It's a tool that we can use in both negative and positive ways. And when we face problems, we naturally zoom into the negative. We naturally zoom into the problem to a point where our view is narrow and we can't see anything past it. This is why it is usually easier for us to give other people advice about their problems than it is for us to apply to our own lives. Because when you are giving someone advice, you're not involved in their problem, so your view is broader and you can see clearer than them. Whereas when they're going through that problem, in the heat of that problem, the only thing they see is their problem. So the difference between these two is one person has distance from the problem, and another person sees themselves as part and parcel of the problem. And the term that's used to describe this is Solomon's paradox. And this was a wise man from the Bible who at some point in his life, he also fell. He also went into, so many things that he probably wouldn't have advised someone else to do it. So this is where the subject of validation comes in, because we go to people for advice. We go to people to ask them for help with our problems. So I've heard that when someone comes to you and they're asking for advice about something, the first step is you validate them and you give them empathy. But is this enough? Is validating someone enough? And is empathizing enough? And this is speaking of a situation when someone is venting, when someone is talking about their problem. Are these two things enough? So venting helps you to create a connection with the person who you're speaking to. And definitely before they give you any advice, they have to listen to you. They have to empathize with you. They have to validate your feelings. They have to connect with whatever it is that you're saying to them. But at the same time, it should not end with just validation. It shouldn't end with someone just empathizing without taking any further steps. Because when we do this, it can turn into co-rumination, which is the same thing as rumination, except you are now involving someone else. And I'm sure you've had an experience where maybe you or someone else kept repeating their problems and they just kept talking about their problems without moving forward from them. That's what co-rumination is. So with rumination, you excessively think about the negative situation you're going through, whereas with co-rumination, you excessively talk about your problems whilst you're seeking social support. So how best can we offer social support in a way that is healthy, that won't end up being toxic? So after taking these steps of listening, empathizing, validating how someone feels, it's important for you to help someone to break out of their immersed way of thinking. Help them to reflect on their patterns of behavior, for instance. And only if they're receptive to hearing your advice, you can then share it. You can then share your own experience. You can then model what you did as a form of to help them to get out of their situation. But if someone is not receptive to your advice, there's also something that is called invisible support, which is helping someone outside of their consciousness. So for instance, someone shares details about the relationship with you and they're not receptive to hearing your advice about it. You can offer them some other kind of help that is not directly linked to their problem. You could I don't know, if the person needs it needs you to, take something out of their day that they usually do themselves, and just take that task upon yourself. So for instance, it's your parent, for instance. You know the problems they're going through, but they will not sit down with you and try to to go into getting advice or whatever, and they're not comfortable with it. You could offer maybe to go buy the groceries, or if you don't usually clean up the house, clean up the house, just to help them to take off the load. And what that does is, without them being aware, that action you took, as unrelated as it is to the problem they're facing, it has helped them out. So if someone is not receptive to your advice, offer them invisible support. Offer them support that is not directly linked to their problem. But then if they are receptive, then that's when you can go ahead and share advice, share your own experience and what you did. But something you can always do is help someone to break out of their immersed way of thinking. Point something out. If someone has been through a situation so many times, just help them to see the pattern they're following. That could help someone out to realize, okay, so this is what I need to do. This is how I need to move forward. So all that we've discussed right now is a tool for dealing with your internal conversation and making it healthy and keeping it healthy. But there's so many more tools that were mentioned by Dr. Ethan Kross. I'm just going to mention a few of them briefly. So the first one that we just mentioned was leveraging the power of good relationships. And it's also important to note that you must be very deliberate about who you go to for support, because on the flip side, you could be going to someone who is encouraging you to keep talking about your problems. You could be going to someone who keeps encouraging you to stay stuck in the same place that you've been all along. So be very deliberate, and you can also have separate people for different areas of your life. If it's work related, you probably know who's more effective and who's more, who can be most helpful in that area of your life. If it's family related, you know the person you can speak to about it. So, good relationships are one of the tools. So another tool is using the power of language, leveraging the power of language. So there was something that was discussed in one of the interviews I spoke about, which is called psychological distancing, which is you basically trying to create distance between you and your problems, you and the situation that you're facing. Because like I've mentioned before, it's easier for us to give advice to other people than it is for us to take it, because we see someone's problem from a distance. So this helps you to create distance between you and your problems. So leveraging the power of language, there's something called distance in self-talk, which basically means speaking to yourself in third person language. And it's a subtle shift that helps you to see yourself in a more objective way. It makes you to see yourself as though you're someone else who has privileged access to your thoughts and feelings. So when when you do this, you see the broader view. So instead of me saying I'm feeling down and I'm depressed and I'm going through a horrible situation, I can then go. I can then ask what is Praymore feeling? I'm speaking to myself in this instance. What is Praymore feeling? Why does he feel that way? That little shift that I did already helps me to distance myself from my problems, and this has worked for me. I recently tried this out to see if it actually works. There was a time I was feeling really down, really bad, and I said, okay, let me try this tool out. It worked for me. So I spoke about myself as though I'm not myself at all. It helped me a lot, and I learned a lot about myself. I saw myself as though I'm someone else, and the same way I would give better advice to someone else, I was able to give myself better advice, and it was easier for me to apply it. And the next tool is called temporal distancing, and this simply means transporting yourself to the future and imagining how you're going to feel when the problem is over, or transporting yourself back to the past and reflecting on how a similar situation changed. So with the COVID-19 pandemic, for instance, one can start to imagine, okay, there was Spanish flu before, and it was very, it was a pandemic. It was very, I don't, it was very difficult, but in the end, people were able to make it through. So just reflecting on the fact that you've been through a similar situation and you're able to get through it can help you in your current situation so you're not stuck in that moment. It creates distance in terms of time. It creates, yeah, it brings you to a place that encourages you to keep moving forward. And in the same way, you could also project, okay, 5 years from now, will the situation be the same way? Will I still be in the same place? If no, then I am encouraged to keep going forward. So that is called temporal distancing, transporting yourself either to the future or to the past in order for you to just remind yourself or to project how the situation is going to change. And whilst on the subject of projecting your thoughts to the future or to the past, there's something I've heard. I've heard this a lot about living in the moment. People saying that the solution to your problem is to live in the moment. It's the answer. And I really feel like, we should stop being so reductionistic and saying that something is the ultimate solution. So it's good for you to live in the moment, but we are not designed to live in the moment all the time. Being lost in thought distinguishes us from other creatures, and it's a tool that we can use. So I feel like there is time for you to live in the moment, yet at the same time, being lost in time can also work for you. You are also supposed to get lost, to travel back to the past, into the future. It's just a healthy, it's a healthy functioning human being. That is something that has to happen in a normal functioning human being. Yet at the same time, being lost in thought can also work against us because, like I already mentioned, any tool can work, can, depending on how you use it, can work for or against you. So all this leads to our need to moderate everything that we do. So no one thing is the solution. All these things are part of a toolbox of solutions, and you just need to learn how to pick the right one in the right moment and use it when you need it. So yeah, so temporal distancing was one of the tools, and the next one is journaling. And I have done this. I think I started doing this properly in I think last year or 2 years ago, and this has really helped me out. So with journaling, it helps you to create a story that has a beginning and an end. So you're basically thinking of yourself as a character in a play, and you're writing about your life. And so what I do is I usually write in detail what I'm going through as though I don't know what I'm going through. And what that helps me to do is reflect on myself as though I'm not myself. It's as though I'm looking at someone else. And this has helped me out a lot, guys. So it's so cathartic. But I think I have to know that it has not always worked in the same way all the time. There's some times that I'll journal and write down, and I wouldn't I wouldn't feel like there has been a release of whatever it is I was feeling. So I don't know if it's because I wouldn't have done it long enough, or if it just simply means me trying out other tools. So I started experimenting with other tools, and I've seen that, okay, sometimes journaling is going to help me in that moment, at that time, in that situation, but other times using the power of language is going to help me out. Temporal distancing, imagining my future and remembering my past, is going to help me out. So yeah, so that is what journaling is all about. You basically see yourself as though you're someone else. You're reading about yourself. You're writing about yourself, and it's easier for you to analyze yourself. And what I love about this is you can go back to it and read and get into your state of mind at a certain time. So maybe a situation is repeating itself, and you've been through something and you wrote about it and you felt a certain way. Maybe someone said something to you, maybe someone stood you up. So you can go back and revisit and check your patterns of behavior. And I was speaking to a friend who was like, I'm very hesitant of journaling because it might lead me to bitterness and, holding on to things that happened in the past. And, I just shared with him how I do it. So basically, if maybe someone really did something annoying, something that hurt me, I journal it, I write everything down as it is, and after writing everything down, I cancel out people's names. And I don't know if it's only me, but after 2 days, 3 days, okay, maybe not 2, 3 days, but maybe after a week or two, I'm not really sure who that person is. I'm not holding on to the person who did something to me. I'm not holding a grudge. But what I leave there is enough to show me my patterns of behavior. What I leave there is substantial enough for me to reflect on my behavior and for me to move forward. So you can try it out. I think it's very helpful, but just do it in a way that is helpful to you. So one time at work, I needed a recommendation letter from my boss. And I went to her and I said, please write me a recommendation letter for this and this and that. And she said, no, you write that recommendation letter and I'll go through it and I will remove what I don't agree with before I sign it. And I kid you not, this was the most difficult letter I've ever written because it required me to sit down and first of all reflect on my view of myself. It needed me to just be aware of how I view myself. At the same time, I had to keep in mind how I was perceived by the person who would read that letter before they approve it. So I also had to keep them in mind. And I mentioned this in my previous podcast, that the fact that we live in a perception of ourselves, and that we are not who we think we are, and we are not who other people think we are, but we are who we think other people think we are. So at the end of the day, what I wrote was what I thought my boss thought about me. I hope that makes sense to you. So writing that letter was very revealing. There are certain things I wouldn't say about myself, but it forced me to see myself as though I'm not myself. I was forced to see myself in the shoes of someone else. So imagine saying something like, Praymore is diligent, he has amazing work ethic. At that time, it felt kind of foreign because I knew that someone was going to go through that letter and they were going to know that is the conversation I had in my head about myself. And they had to agree with it. So it's quite different from a resume, for instance, and just writing your bio. But in this case, I was writing on behalf of someone else. So that was quite interesting. I wouldn't want to do it again. But yeah, so that was on journaling. And the next point is the Batman effect. So with this one is you basically asking yourself what someone you admire would do in your situation. I've heard this in many Christian circles, WWJD, what would Jesus do? So you basically imagine, okay, in this situation, would Jesus do this? Would Jesus curse this person? So you put yourself, you imagine how someone you admire, how someone you think has solutions would act in that situation. And for many children, they're superheroes. I think that's why it's called the Batman effect. So you basically think, okay, what would Dora the Explorer do in this situation? What would Batman do in this situation? And what that does, again, the key word is distance. What that does is it creates distance between you and your problems. So it's no longer your problems, it's Batman's problems. And now you are just trying to apply the solution that Batman would apply in the situation. It's no longer your problem, it's Jesus' problem. You're no longer going to apply, your own kind of solution, but you would do what he would do in that situation. So I've not tried this out. I would not even maybe I have, but then it's not something that I always use. So you can just check it out for yourself, see if it works. But I believe it works. I believe it works because I've heard many people saying, just imagining someone else being in the situation I'm in helped me out and all. And I look forward to trying it out one day, but I have not. But it sounds like something reasonable, something that I'll do. So the next point is seeking out an emotional experience of awe. And this ranges from something like looking at the stars, basically seeking something that you can't explain and just focusing on it. Look, it's something that makes your concerns seem smaller. So if you're wondering about the stars, about something that you can't even explain, it, in contrast to your problem, it makes your problem seem smaller. So this one, I don't usually do. I don't usually seek out an emotional experience of awe, but I've done it. I remember one time that I did. I think it was last year. Yeah, it was last year. So I was feeling really down. I was, I had my emotions all over the place, and I just couldn't sit in my room. And I went out. I just went on the lawn on the grass. It was in the night, and I looked up to the stars. And in that moment, I wasn't aware that okay, I'm seeking out an emotional experience of awe. All I did was focus my eyes on the stars. That's it. And I was just laying there. And after 30 minutes, for some reason, I felt better. So I don't, I assume that's the reason why it helped me out. It's something I would do it over and over again. It was really nice. Just focusing on something that I don't know, something that I know I'll never fix, something that I know I'll never have a solution to, something that I don't know how, I can't explain it. And this, I think, ties in a lot with our spirituality. And Dr. Ethan Kross also mentions the place of spirituality and all. But yeah, I'm not going to explain that in detail now, but that plays a huge role. I've seen how um, my experience with something that is beyond me, with someone who is beyond me, has really helped me to move past my internal conversation that was not healthy at all. So yeah, seek out an emotional experience of awe. And the next one is use the environment to your advantage. I'm really gaining a liking of this one. So it could be something like cleaning your room. I do this. With me, I've noticed how there's a correlation between my emotions, my state of mind, and my environment. So when I'm in a really good space, my environment tends to be spotless. And when I'm just feeling kind of okayish, my space also looks okayish. I'm generally a neat person, but when I am messy, when my place is messy, I know that there's something wrong. And I can feel it. It's not as though my environment tells me that something is wrong. I can feel it. And what I do as I'm starting to move forward from it and heal from it, I clean. I literally clean my room. I take things, I put them in order. I order my books. And if it's extreme, I actually change the order, change the position of my bed, change. That helps me to feel like I have some kind of order in my life, and that order then transfers to my mind, and I feel like I've created space in my mind, and I can now start to strategize and think and move forward from the place that I am. And yeah, it just makes me feel like I'm in a new space, or I've entered a new season, if you want to call it that. Some people are creatures of habit, and they really like how their place looks all the time. They want things to stay in the same place. But with me, I'm very different. After a while, I'm going to feel agitated if things just stay in the same place. I always want things to move around. I always want to be to be amazed, to wake up and be like, oh, this is there, that is there, that is there. So this helps me out a lot. Use your environment to your advantage. Cleaning is one thing that I can speak of. I'm sure there are more ways for you to take advantage of your environment, but this is a big one and it has worked for me. And the next thing is time. Um, so Dr. Ethan Kross mentioned how time has enormous impact on our emotions. They become less intense over time, and I've noticed this too. So I don't know if it's just time itself that is helping out, but all I know is when something happens in the heat of that moment, something is going to look so big, so intense, so overwhelming. But if you I don't know what it is, but over time, the intensity gets lessened. I don't know if I would say that giving something time is going to heal it completely and solve it completely, but I know that giving yourself time helps. And then another one, which it might be a controversial one, and it's not necessarily something that I subscribe to. It's social networking sites. So, it was mentioned that sharing your inner thoughts with a device removes social constraints that would limit us from sharing when we are with people. So, it changes the nature of our sharing. Personally, for me, social media, social networking sites, I do not use them. Like, for me, I always see them as a threat to my mental health, because what ends up happening is I've seen how posts that people's posts, they affect me so much. So I'd rather not be in that space. And I'm generally not that interested or eager to be there, except if I have a reason to be. But it has been very damaging to my mental health. So I try to use it as little as possible. Yet on the flip side, it has been found that certain people find it easier to share on social media, to share their thoughts, to express themselves, and they find this cathartic and it helps them in their internal conversation. So that is just, I thought that's amazing. I thought that's amazing, and I hope it actually works. But there are certain things, like, I don't think you're going to be able to utilize every single tool. So if you identify the ones that work for you, use those, and if they don't work for you, leave them behind. Tailor each of these solutions to yourself. And with social media, there's so many conversations around the fact that it it heightens your ability to curate who you are and to present, how you want to be seen, which is something that we do in the offline world. Honestly, we shave our hair, we dress up, we wear perfume, we always want to present ourselves in a flattering way. However, our ability to do that offline is limited in comparison to on social media. So your hair could get messed up, for example, and people are seeing you as your days progressing. People are seeing you as you're experiencing your life. So I think this is one of my, I don't know if I can call it my fears, but this is one of the reasons why I am not so eager to engage with certain platforms. And I think it's key to note that certain platforms might work for you better than others. So I do have social media like YouTube, um, and other platforms that engage interactions that I find healthy and useful, and they're meaningful to me. So I think if you find platforms that work well for you, and if social media is even a tool that you can consider for um, working through your inner conversations, then by all means experiment with every single one of these tools for yourself. Yeah, and the key is always not to be reductionistic with anything. Like I've mentioned already, a tool like meditation, for instance, is very useful. I use it, but there's certain times and certain places I can be that don't allow me to sit down and meditate. And I know someone can say, yeah, you can just stare blankly into your screen, something like that. I know there's always a way to work through something, but it's helpful for you to carry around a toolbox of solutions and not just to rely on one thing and see it as the ultimate solution to all your problems. So, yeah, so just moderate your use of all these tools that I've mentioned. Yeah, and please, guys, just check this guy's book out. It's by no means a promotion, it's not paid or anything. It's something that I found really helpful, and I think other people are going to appreciate it. And yeah, and if you have any questions or if you want to start any discussions, please just comment or post something where I'll be able to see them. There's a comment section on YouTube, and yeah. So thank you so much for listening, for spending this time on my podcast. Until the next one. Bye.